Everyone, it's Trags, and it's Wednesday, August 1st, and time for episode 256 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com. Also, follow us on Twitter at CLNS Media. And for all of our football coverage, including the Patriots, follow us at Patriots CLNS. A great story last week on Bleacher Report about the would-be successor to Tom Brady, traded on Halloween last year to the 49ers for a second-round pick. Today, we welcome Joon, the writer who had the chance to share a meal with Jimmy Garoppolo at a pretty posh Santa Clara Steakhouse and chat with his family and friends. Joon, welcome to Patriots Beat. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Trags. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you having fun at Bleacher Report? It sounds like you are. They've got you on some pretty high-profile stories.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good time since I came over here about a year and a half ago.
What was your background again? I mean, obviously you were here in Boston for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, 30-minute walk to Fenway Park. And then I spent my freshman year at Boston University. I interned at WEI.com after that. And before that, I interned for, I think, 3 summers at the Boston Herald as a sports intern. And then after my freshman year at BU, I transferred to Cornell, spent 1 summer at the Washington Post, did a bunch of freelance writing between classes and blogged a bunch, and now here I am in New York City at Bleacher Report.
That is tremendous, and I do remember you as a colleague at WEI.com working alongside Rob Bradford. Obviously, you picked up a few things about getting to the personality of the athlete. That's one thing Rob always told me people really want to read about is the personality. And your story on Jimmy Garoppolo, Superman in disguise. Tom Brady is yesterday's news. That surely shook up some headlines last week. Meet the new boss, it says, in one of the 5 cover stories for Bleacher Report, Power 50. It's a celebration of 2018's most influential people in sports culture. Wow. Clearly, Jimmy G, Joon, is a young quarterback who hasn't lost as a starter in 7 NFL starts. Everybody in New England obviously remembers the 2 starts that he had back in 2016. Had the 5 starts last year, 5-0 in San Francisco's final 5 games of 17. But a spot in the Power 50 as one of 2018's most influential sports culture. So I got one question. Why?
Sure. It was kind of all up to my editors. I really had no input here. I kind of do what I'm told. We got the access to Jimmy, and they thought that he would fit into this Power 50 list, and that's kind of what happened.
So it was your editorial staff that came to that conclusion.
Yeah, it was. I had very little input on who was kind of on these lists, so I'm just kind of doing what I'm told.
So, besides getting a nice Fleming's dinner out of it, why do you think Jimmy agreed to do it?
I think part of it is because he had never done any story like this before, and I think they're preparing to kind of shape his off-the-field brand as it is, and they wanted the fans out there, Niner fans, Patriots fans, whatever, to kind of get to know him a little bit. It's obviously he signed a big contract in San Francisco. There's a lot of pressure on him. And in New England, there wasn't a lot of press around him because the Patriots kind of prevented a lot of stories from being done on him. And so
right.
I think they were ready to kind of introduce him to the world. For whatever reason, they decided that the best forum for that would be through me and through Bleacher Report. And that's how the story came together. I think a lot of it has to do with, trying to set him up as a person who can endorse things, because you need to know the athlete's personality in order for someone to be a good spokesperson for a brand, and it's to kind of set up the narrative around him heading into the season, because people want to know who these guys are off the field, and Jimmy clearly has a personality, a pretty intense personality in terms of being a quarterback and wanting to be a perfectionist on and off the field. And so he decided to chat for the first time.
Who was the first guy you spoke to, or first person, I should say, that you spoke to for the story?
First person, I think I spoke to his friend Jerome Williams, who's known as Juice. He's one of his 5 college roommates and one of his teammates at EIU, and he kind of helped me get set up with the rest of his friends. But before that, I'd been talking to his agent about figuring out a situation where we could work out a lengthy interview. I talked to Don Yee about that, and so Don's not quoted in the story, and I didn't actually interview him for the story, but he was kind of the first person I talked to. But in terms of an actual interview, it was one of his best friends, Juice.
So I would think, Joon, that Don Yee would be willing to do this because he knew the dynamic in New England, right? I mean, he knew
Course,
Tom Brady
yeah.
and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick control everything there, and Jimmy G had to really bide his time and pay his dues there and spoke when spoken to. That was kind of the deal. But once you get out from under the umbrella of the Patriots, Belichick, and Brady, I could see why Don Yee, his agent, obviously Brady's agent as well, would want this for his client.
Yeah, I think it's just part of it is just controlling the narrative around a player. The Patriots are so good at doing that just for the organization, and I think that this is kind of the first time in his career where Jimmy's kind of able to be exactly who he wants on and off the field, and he is very confident in himself and really is. He really does not have any problems kind of being himself, and is pretty authentic to who he is. And so I think that this was an opportunity for him to not only let the world know who he is, but kind of take back the narrative around him and kind of set the record straight.
Did Jimmy G really think he could beat out Tom Brady when he got there?
It was really interesting because the question that I asked about that kind of elicited that response had nothing to do with the Patriots or anything. I was talking to him about his mindset, going into the season as a starting quarterback. I asked him about, just confidence and believing in yourself, and that's kind of how he set it up. He talked about playing with his brothers and playing basketball with them as a kid, and always thinking that he was going to beat them until the moment that he lost. And so he kind of brought up New England by himself. He brought up the fact that he had this mindset coming into the Patriots, even as a rookie, thinking that he could be better than Tom Brady. And I think that's not representative of what he thinks about Tom. I think it's more of representative of what he thinks about himself. I really don't think that has anything to do with Tom and what he thinks about Tom's skill set. I think it more has to do with his self-confidence, his belief in his abilities, and his belief that he can become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
So, Joon, I'm really glad you brought up that context because that's exactly the way I read it. I am sure that every quarterback in the NFL competing for a spot, whether it's OTAs, training camp, or a rookie, who wins, like Carson Wentz for the Eagles last year, who wins the starting job, feels like they belong. They're the best guy for the job on that team. And it's got to be that attitude. Otherwise, you're a dead duck before you even take a snap in the NFL.
Yeah, I think part of it is just in the pursuit of greatness, whether that's in sports or not. I think you need to have kind of an irrational mindset that you can be great. I kind of related to Jimmy on that level, just feeling like as a high schooler, feeling like I could hang with the big boys. And, I knew at that time it probably wasn't as good as a lot of the other writers on the beat, but I knew that at a certain point, if I was able to develop my skill set enough, I was able to become a good enough writer and hopefully get to a place like Bleacher Report. And, I talked to Jimmy kind of about my own journey to where I was today and why we ended up at the table together that night in Santa Clara and how I'd gotten there. And I think we both connected on that level, and that's why he was able to open up to me about that.
How long into the interview was that Fleming's Steakhouse dinner with Jimmy? How was that? Like midway through? Was it early on in this whole collection process?
It was near the end. I like to do a lot of pre-interviews for this kind of stuff just because I like to be as prepared as possible and try to bring up as many potential anecdotes for a story in order to kind of report them out even more, especially with the subject. And so I had done maybe 15 pre-interviews with friends and former coaches and his family, around half hour, 30 to 45 minutes each per interview, and had transcribed them all and come in with a bunch of pre-interview notes and
sure.
Topics that I wanted to hit to make sure that I got as much as I could, and then kind of follow up after that.
And obviously the line that everybody picked up on last week, I'm better than this dude. What I really appreciated about you doing this story, Joon, is your follow-up, because a lot of reporters would just go, oh, wow, I got the money quote. But then you followed up how many times? 2 or 3, 4 times to kind of
I think it was
clarify
like 3 times.
what he was
Yeah.
actually saying there.
Sure. Yeah. And for me, like, I don't even think I kind of fully processed what he had said exactly in that moment. It was more just a kind of a reactionary thing, for me, just to try to understand a little bit clearer where he was coming from. And, it wasn't kind of until I like decompressed in the car back afterwards, sitting, and writing out kind of a bunch of notes to my editor as to what had just went down and what I had gotten from Jimmy, that I kind of realized what he had said and how that quote could potentially take off, because, on the surface, it is pretty inflammatory.
Well, so guess what line stuck out to me? It wasn't that one. Take a wild guess which one really stuck. Actually, in the whole story, because a lot of it had to do with Jimmy's relationship with Tom Brady and how he got along with the best quarterback on the planet. There's one line that stuck out to me. Any guesses?
Was it the one that they wanted to kill each other sometime?
Yes, very good, Joon. We got along, Jimmy said, but there were always times where we wanted to kill each other. Offer some context there.
I really just kind of asked about the competition between the two of them. And, the way that Jimmy framed it was that Jimmy really looked up to Tom both kind of on and off the field as a role model. But when you're competing with someone, there's always going to be some hard times, and you're going to say things or do things that rub each other the wrong way. And, you go about your own business afterwards, and then you kind of come back and you guys are, a family, and so you kind of have to deal with it. And I think that Jimmy really pushed Tom to be the best version of himself. I really don't think it's a coincidence that Tom's best 3-year stretch of his career came with Jimmy Garoppolo as his backup. And I think that for the most part, Jimmy was able to kind of improve as much as humanly possible in his 3.5 seasons in New England because he was working and absorbing the routine and competitiveness of, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time.
So the reason that really sticks out to me is everybody publicly, and you point out that you don't really get a private look inside these personalities inside Gillette Stadium because that's just not permitted by the Patriots. But everybody always has this image of Jimmy G smiling, being happy, even on the sideline, joking around or what have you. They very rarely see that intense side. I would say even in the games he started in Arizona and at home against Miami before he left with the shoulder injury, people never saw him like fired up, angry, what have you. But obviously there had to be that element behind the scenes with Tom.
Right. And I think that, Jimmy's kind of this ridiculously competitive guy, and he really doesn't have a life outside of football. It's really just, going to the facility, spending all the time training, working out, watching film, trying to mentally prepare himself to be the best quarterback possible. He doesn't have food at home. He doesn't have a lot of clothes at home. Most of his stuff is at the facility, and as much of a cliche as it is, he really does live and breathe football and live and breathe at the facility. And so this isn't a really intense guy, and he's preparing to be a starting quarterback, and he wants to be the best, and he thinks that he can get there. And I think that that's kind of the mindset you have to have. You have to be irrationally confident in order to reach this plateau of greatness, especially within the context of football and sports.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you ask, because I didn't notice this, did you ask him about the Aladdin nameplate?
I did. We actually talked about it for like 10 minutes, and he said that he was kind of confused as to why the media was so obsessed with it, but he said that at a certain point, maybe down the road in the future, he wants to dress up as Aladdin just to kind of give a nod to his former teammates and the inside joke there.
What was it, Tom, who gave him that moniker and installed the nameplate? Where did that come from again?
I believe that it was. I think it was one of the offensive line, maybe Cam Fleming, who was one of his best friends on the Pats, who called him Aladdin one day, kind of in the team cafeteria, and it stuck. Someone printed out a nameplate and stuck it up on the locker room door, and that's when kind of the media saw, and he was kind of confused about the commotion around his locker, and it was not Tom who did it. I believe it was Cam Fleming, but I have to go back to my transcripts to find that out.
Speaking with Joon Lee of Bleacher Report, did an outstanding job on a multiple thousand-word story on Jimmy Garoppolo. We'll return to him in just a moment. Right now, I want to tell you about a new wellness brand for men. It's called Hims, 4hims.com. 66% of men lose their hair by the age of 35. Thing is, when you start to notice hair loss, it's too late. It's always easier, guys, to keep the hair you have than to replace the hair you've lost. Is that hairline slowly starting to move backwards? Any bald spots popping up yet? Well, there is a solution. It's a one-stop shop for hair loss, skin care, and sexual wellness for men. It's called 4hims.com. Thanks to science, baldness can now be optional. Hims connects you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. There's well-known generic equivalents to name-brand prescriptions to help you keep your hair. Order now. My listeners get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now, while supplies last. See the website for full details. This would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. Go to 4hims.com/trags. That's FORHIMS.com/TRAGS. 4hims.com/trags. Again, speaking with Joon Lee of Bleacher Report and his outstanding feature on Jimmy Garoppolo. All right, I want to get to some of the other storylines from your feature, and one of which really sticks out to me, kind of telling everybody the kind of guy Jimmy Garoppolo was when he was younger. His Pop Warner coach, Bob Vitti, frequently called a play, you write, usually saved for desperation time in Madden. It's a halfback pass wherein the quarterback, who was Jimmy's best friend growing up, Dan Lowry, would hand the ball off to Jimmy, who would chuck it down the field. The reason I'm getting into all of this, apparently, and you write this, Bob Vitti approached him about changing from running back to quarterback, but he said no. Why?
Mm-hmm. Well, part of the reason was his older brothers basically said, you're going to get as many touches as running back, being in Pop Warner football, as you would as a quarterback, just because there's a lot less throwing in the lower levels of football. But the main reason was that Jimmy did not want to take Dan's job, because Dan was one of his best friends growing up, lived a couple streets over from the cul-de-sac that they live. The Garoppolo's living in Arlington Heights, and so he didn't want to ruffle any feathers there, and he was more than happy staying at the halfback position, just because he knew that he was going to get his passing opportunities, and he knew that he was going to touch the ball a bunch. And so that was kind of the main driving reason behind it, was him not wanting to take his friend's job, back in sixth grade.
Right, and there's irony there, obviously, right? Because, as
right.
he grows up in college and in the pros, that's exactly what he wants to do. He wants to take the job of the quarterback already in place. Right.
Yeah, and I think at that point, Jimmy wasn't even necessarily thinking about a professional football career, but it definitely kind of began. He was kind of a late bloomer. He did not become a quarterback until a full-time quarterback until his junior year of high school, and even then, it took him a while to get on scouts' radars, and it really wasn't until kind of his senior year at Eastern Illinois where he really became a legitimate NFL prospect and someone that people took seriously.
So how did Jimmy Garoppolo wind up at Eastern Illinois?
It was because his quarterback coach, Jeff Christensen, he basically set him up with one of the recruiting coordinators, Roy Whitkey at Eastern Illinois, who had recruited Tony Romo. And he basically insisted, this is a guy that's going to be really, really good. There's not a lot of tape on him, but he's got a lot of potential, and Eastern Illinois took a chance on him. He had not received, very many college football offers, and so Jimmy wanted to be a quarterback, and knowing kind of the history at Eastern Illinois with Tony Romo and Sean Payne, he knew that this was a situation where he would be able to develop, and that's kind of it. I mean, he did not received a lot of looks from many other programs because he had started late and kind of began to blossom as a quarterback in his senior year. And so there just wasn't a ton of opportunity, and so he took the best one that he had, which was at Eastern Illinois.
What's interesting is Dino Babers actually said the guy shouldn't be at Eastern Illinois, right? I mean, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically, Dino Babers, who's now the head coach at Syracuse, he walks in. This is spring ball going into Jimmy's junior year, and people expected them to have Jimmy transferred to another school because Babers came in from Baylor, was kind of running the RG3 helping run the RG3 offense over there, who had just come off winning a Heisman, and they had a quarterback who they felt was ready to be a mobile dude and play in that similar offense. And then he saw Jimmy throw 5 passes, and he had never seen a release quicker than that. The only person Babers had seen was Dan Marino, and so he turned to the kind of one of the staffers and said, "This guy should not be here." And they're like, "Yeah, that's what we've been telling you." He's like, "No, this guy's too good for Division I AA. He should not be playing at this level. He should be playing at an even higher level." And so I think Jimmy had caught Dino off guard because nobody kind of told him that there was this NFL prospect kind of waiting for them and has fallen into their lap.
How much of an influence? I mean, fathers are always huge in their son's development, both growing into a man and also if they have athletic aspirations, being an influence as a young athlete. How big of a deal was Tony Sr. in Jimmy Garoppolo's development?
I mean, obviously huge, just because it's a real working class family. Arlington Heights is a nice neighborhood, and I think the way that the Garoffalos kind of framed how hard their dad worked is that he had to wake up at 6:30 every morning and would be done at 4:35 in order to make sure that they could feed the 4 brothers, make sure that they could live in this nice Chicago suburb. It was a real Midwestern working class family. I think that mentality really, really rubbed off on Jimmy. And I mentioned this in the story that his dad would tell him from time to time after workouts, kind of slip in the middle of their conversations, there's always someone working harder than you. It was something that kind of haunted Jimmy in the back of his head and kind of pushed him to work harder every single day. And I think that influence of his dad and the blue class working collar mentality, the not taking anything for granted and feeling like you need to earn every single opportunity, I think that still stems from how hard his dad worked as a kid growing up.
All right, let's fast forward to Halloween morning, 2017, and the sense that you got from Jimmy when you spoke to him and those close to him around him, did he sense he was going to be dealt?
I think he didn't really know what was going to happen. His mom had been texting him. Jimmy doesn't really check social media, and his mom apparently kind of checks and reads everything. And she had been getting this. She was getting a sense that he was going to get traded. He didn't really know what was going to happen. I mean, part of him was already planning for the next year to live in the Seaport and be in New England, be a Patriot, even though his contract was expiring. And so I think part of him just didn't really know what to expect. He was taking a nap when the trade happened, and he woke up and had received a ton of texts and calls from his agent, and he followed up and, then hopped on the phone with Bill Belichick and then hopped on a plane to San Francisco in order to finally get his opportunity as a starting quarterback. And so I think that he was just kind of going with the punches at that point because he really did not know what to expect, and he figured that whatever happened was going to end up being the best situation for him to succeed.
All right. There is something that happened on the way to the airport, though, and
of course, yeah.
I want to get into that a little bit because when someone sees life flash before their eyes, it literally can be a life-altering experience. Describe what happened that Halloween morning when he was getting on the Niners' private plane to go from Boston to Santa Clara.
Sure. So he is in a limo that he got on at 5:30 in the morning, driving down I-95. They're about to enter onto the highway. Another car is exiting, kind of parallel to them. The car that is exiting kind of skids off the road and heads straight towards Jimmy and his limo. And so Jimmy looks out the window, and he's basically staring straight at the car with the headlights and the car has to skid off the road into a ditch in order to basically save Jimmy Garoppolo's life. And he was kind of in shock and did not really know what was happening or what was going on. And Jimmy's always been one of those guys who is a planner. He plans ahead, to reduce anxiety, and wants to know where things are going. He wants to have an idea of what he's working towards and having a goal set in order to kind of reach it and break it. And so this was a situation where he didn't really know what was going to happen, and it kind of freaked him out. And the possibility that he could have died was very, very real that day, unless if his driver had not kind of stepped up and skidded off the road. And so I think that I think it's very representative of kind of his situation right now in San Francisco. He's been planning for this event for a very long time, and he kind of doesn't really know what's going to happen right now. And for the first time in Jimmy Garoppolo's life, you can plan all you want, but at a certain point you have to perform, and this is his opportunity to live up to the expectations. And while he has been preparing to be a really great quarterback, I think a lot of people are kind of questioning whether or not whether or not he can actually be one, how good he is. Is he baby Brady, as a lot of people have labeled him? Who is he, and what's going to happen? I think that's a question that I can't answer, and Jimmy can't necessarily answer right now, and we're just going to have to wait and see.
Has he talked to you about the expectations of being as good as the Rams in the NFC West? There are going to be a lot of 49er fans who expect, hey, he went 5-0 at the end of last year. They finished 6-10. We can flip that and go 10-6 and compete for a wild card and get to the playoffs.
Yeah, he knows that there's a lot of pressure on him especially because of the money and the type of attention that he's getting, and kind of the unprovenness of it all. He's kind of the world's biggest underdog. The world's most overrated underdog. All these people are talking about how good he can be, but he's never done it over the course of a full season. And I think people are waiting to jump on him at the first opportunity that they can. That first interception, I think, is going to be a big deal. And the first loss is going to be a big deal because he's never lost as a starter. And so I think that he knows that people are waiting to jump on. He knows that San Francisco 49er fans believe that they're set for the next 10 to 15 years at quarterback. And he's just putting all that on his shoulders and trying to prove them right.
What about John Lynch and his decision to give Jimmy $137 million with a signing bonus of $7 million and a guaranteed roster bonus of $28 million over 5 years?
Well, I also don't think that you can discount Kyle Shanahan's role in all of this. Because
right.
Lynch and Shanahan are very much kind of a partnership, and they came to the decision together that Jimmy was their guy. And John Lynch came to that decision kind of before Kyle did. He was convinced pretty quickly, kind of given Jimmy's skill set and his performance in the field, that Jimmy was a guy that they could commit their franchise to. They were planning on going after Kirk Cousins in the offseason, potentially going after a guy in the draft, thinking that they would have a very high draft pick, given their record at the time. And, all of that changed really, really quickly. Kyle Shanahan eventually came around. By the end of Jimmy's third game, he was convinced that this was the guy for them, that this was someone that they wanted to work with long term. They didn't want to mess around with the franchise tag. Jimmy did not want to mess around with the franchise tag. They did not want any distractions going into the season. They did not want headlines on ESPN asking if the 49ers are ready to commit to him. And so they sat down in the offseason, knocked out a contract. Jimmy signed it in his kitchen, in his hometown kitchen back home in Arlington Heights. They took a private jet out to San Francisco for the press conference, and kind of the rest is history from there.
How closely are you going to follow him this year? Obviously every football fan's going to follow Jimmy Garoppolo, his ups and downs. But, after doing an interview like that and putting all the work into a story like this, I assume you're going to have closer eyes on Jimmy G than even most football fans will.
Yeah, for me, it's like when I do these big stories, I always kind of try to keep an eye on how they're doing afterwards, mostly because I want to see how the story ages. I wrote this story on Kylian Mbappe, who is the World Cup star for France, and I did it back in October, like 7 months before anyone in the U.S. knew who he was, really. And that story has aged remarkably well, and I feel very good about that. And so for my own selfish purposes, I want to see how these stories age, and hopefully that they hold up for me, and I'll be following Jimmy very closely. Not only as a football fan, but out of selfish interest as a reporter.
I mean, if he goes to the Super Bowl and there's a rematch between Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo, you would not
Man,
mind
I can't
that.
even imagine the headlines. I cannot even imagine the headlines that would come with that.
I mean, crazier things have happened, Joon. You know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I cannot. It would be very. I feel like the media frenzy would just be completely out of control, especially with how the Boston media is. I don't think that would. I think it would be kind of a media firestorm at that point.
I mean, it would be literally over the top. How can people follow you on social and online at Bleacher Report, Joon?
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Joon Lee, Joonlee. I'm also on Instagram at Joon, Joon. You can follow my work there. Follow Bleacher Report, download the Bleacher Report app, and you can see my writing there. And I think that's about it.
Thanks again for downloading today's Patriots Beat. Want to once again thank our terrific guest from Bleacher Report, Joon Lee. Be sure to check out his story on Jimmy Garoppolo at bleacherreport.com and on the app. Jimmy Garoppolo is Superman in disguise. You can also give us a follow at Patriots CLNS and at CLNS Media. Give my own personal account a follow if you're not already, at Trags, Trags. Today's sponsor, forhims.com. For Patriots Content Manager Mike Alonji, CLNS Media Executive Producer Larry H. Russell, and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso, this is Mike Petralia. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. This has been the Patriots Beat podcast, powered by CLNS Media.